agrees with you that he'll try my show, that will double my audience. And as a media person, I love big numbers. I love big numbers like that to say, hey, one man's recommendation uh, gave me 100% gain in market share. So I really, really appreciate that. And want you to know that we cover local economy, the free market. That's our work here. And we're trying to figure out, as we are enjoying the Lost Way series by the Chattanooga Times Free Press, we're trying to figure out what the marketplace idea is in that long narrative to which the newspaper gave two reporters and a great deal of time and liberty to create. It's a three-parter. Part two is Wednesday. And then on the 1st of October, the story is Our City's Past, Our Future. And we are hearing all about the notable people who sort of planned Chattanooga's revival, its renaissance, and who are no longer really on the scene now in the same active way. Maybelle Hurley and others are not either not here or not active or not alive. And there seems to be a sense of loss that Dave Crockett tried to point out in his campaign for mayor, how he had a role in that great story as well. And there seems to have been a lot of loss of the concentric thinking, not concentric, but the sort of city-centric, favorable thinking that brought about the public meetings, the forums, the concerts, and the planning groups that worked to develop the riverfront and bring alternative business and commerce to city in the decline of old-style manufacturing, which in many ways has gone. There are those brown fields out along the bend in the river that are being reused now for apartment complexes and other uses. And the question I have as I read this story, I've not read the entirety of the very generous accounting in the newspaper in Sunday's editions, but I've read the last half, trying to see how it turned out, right? And the headline is The Lost Way. And I'm asking, okay, where does the principle of the free market play in a city which has zoning, which has a city council, which has a municipal corporation government, of course, in three parts. That's the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And then it has its share of well-intentioned, wealthy benefactors like Jack Lupton and many others who are the scions of wealth, whose estates don't go through probate, but are put in trust, in inter vivos trusts, which by the way, my listener, can have everything in trust as well. I think trusts are a wonderful way to protect your assets and to reduce the prospect of litigation against yourself, against your person. And an inter vivos trust is something that they use. The reason I mentioned that is that the story mentions a $200 million kitty that became the basis of spending for the Lyndhurst Foundation, and that it went through probate. Well, things go through probate when you don't plan, right? And if you're a common poor person like me, I'm just a lowly scribe and scribbler. David Tulis, editor, former newspaper editor at the Times Free Press, 24 years there. Very humble job indeed. And even I, though, know that you shouldn't have anything go through probate. The story says it was the largest ever probated in the South. Well, only because the smart people don't go to probate. They have everything in trust. Inter vivos, which means you have you create an artificial entity, which is a trust, and the owner gives this asset to this entity that he has created, the inter vivos trust. And then you have beneficiaries who are responsible for either taking the assets in that trust for themselves or making a private distribution. So you have not a public distribution of assets where all the beneficiaries are named and the percentage is given, but you have rather a private distribution of those assets from the deceased, right? The person who's had that wealth is dead, and you, if you are the beneficiary, and you are entrusted to make a distribution. And because that's a private arrangement, right? That requires trust, and it is a way that the wealthy avoid the public scrutiny of probate court, and And they also immunize themselves from litigation, because if you don't own anything, yes, someone may sue you, but you don't have any wealth that can be attached, right? Everything is in trust, and if you can show that these trusts were created for your various assets, your vehicles, your cars and trucks, your bank accounts, your house, your domestic possessions, if all those can be shown, your mutual funds, right? Your investments, if it can be shown that those were not built or not created in an attempt to elude the judge, then you're fine, and the judge has nothing to do to attach a claim against you if you lose litigation. So that's what the wealthy do. Now, the question that I'm asking you at 800-8949, 800-8949, what role does the market have to play in Chattanooga in the revival back in the 1980s, the Chattanooga Venture, public gatherings, the idea of the idea of using the Delphi method to create consensus, right? And well, the Delphi method is something that was used in the defense industry and you might say the surveillance warfare state to arrive at a consensus among disputing analysts and reviewers of a particular problem. So you have a Delphi technique which allows there to be a burring away of the sharp edges, so that in the end you have disputing analysts who all end up agreeing on something, right? They all agree that this is the compromise position from what I believe, and we're going to all work together to come up with something that no one agrees on, but which we all have agreed to as part of this process, in which we compromise what we understand to be true and end up with an analysis that we then pass on to the president, right? So he can do the right thing, which is a compromise of what we all say. So that's the Delphi technique, and just you can see it you can read about that at Wikipedia. So that's what we had it with Chattanooga Venture and all these visioning process. It's kind of social engineering. And is it the free market? Is it the free market? Is it better to have a city that is not managed and not, you might say, not manipulated to these improvements, such as the ones we have here? Is it better to have those manipulations to bring about the good things that we have and that are now in decline? Or is it better to have free market improvements in a city, if they're to come at all? And I think the fault with my argument for the free market there's several faults in it. Okay, I want you to understand that if you have a free market that brings about certain amenities and certain structures, certain parks, certain attractions like the aquarium, it won't be perhaps as grand, and it may not be as pretty, and that's because the free market, which is to say the aggregate of all the interests of all the people in the city, doesn't often care about aesthetics, and it often doesn't care about these things that you might call the finer points of life. The story in the Times Free Press today will probably argue in parts 2 and 3 that the lack of care for internal social differences and disputes brought an end to what was the 1980s Renaissance. Now that's 40 years ago now, and that the newspaper may argue in its progressive way that there have to be some attention given to social reforms, and there may be some good in that, but right now I would just ask about the wealthy. Should the wealthy be expected to fund Lyndhurst foundations and fund nonprofit organizations that plan out the future of a city? Is it possible to plan a city out, or is a city too diverse and too great that for it to be planned by even the most wealthy the wealthiest benefactors? And Chattanooga, as you read about in the Times Free Press store today, has several of those, and they all had a vision. They got together with movers and shakers, and they had many committees, and they got things done. Well, I think the criticisms that the story cites are that things were being done in secret, that there is an elite that is making these decisions, and that they are leveraging their wealth to direct tax dollars to these favorite projects. And so there's the criticism. But the problem with my perspective, the free market perspective, is that it is incoherent. And of course, I would say that there is an internal coherence in the free market where you don't have big people throwing their weight around and leveraging public-private partnerships and leveraging tax money to make favored projects go through. If you don't have the wealthy to move around like that, then you have an amorphous city, a city that doesn't have an identity. You have a city which is freer, perhaps, but doesn't have things that are outwardly gorgeous, outwardly resplendent, magnificent. You're not going to have things like that. There's not going to be as much, maybe not as much touristy attractions that are public in nature, right? You may have private attractions, but you won't have as many public attractions. And the idea of zoning comes to mind as I mentioned, that zoning gives the city corporation authority over what goes where. And what I would propose is better long term for a city like Chattanooga is to not have zoning. Now, of course, just saying that is just kind of silly because there are too many people who want zoning. There are too many people who seek protection of their property values in the state, right? They're seeking the state, the police power, to maintain their value and not allow the marketplace to play out. We can't have a free market because, well, if an abattoir, which is a factory that kills pigs and slices up the meat, if an abattoir is built next to my fine house here on the edge of Chattanooga, well, I've lost my property value. Well, maybe not. It may actually increase in value if you find that the industrialization of your neighborhood brings higher values, and related businesses to the pig death factory come in and bid your land up. You may gain 30% or 40% just on the fact that your property may come in demand at some point. So just because you have an unkind neighbor or an obstreperous neighbor or a neighbor with bad smells or noises doesn't mean that you're being injured, unless, of course, you can prove it in court. And that's what always the standard is. Can you prove it in court? Are you so badly damaged by the pig farm or the slaughterhouse being next to you that you can have a jury cite the dollar value? Okay, that's what you have to ask. And if you can't, then you can't show that you've been wronged, right? If you've not been wronged, who are you to complain, right? You have to be able to show a jury of your peers that you've been injured or wronged, and try to put a dollar value on that. And that's that's what the courts are for. The court is always open. An attorney like Jerry Summers will tell you the court is open. And so if we have courts, then we really don't need regulation. Because regulation presumes that the courts don't exist, and we're going to regulate out from among human interests conflict. We're going to prevent conflict by the government taking over all the property and having a rule for all, right? Having a rule for all is what zoning is. Even the reformed zoning from last year, form-based coding, even that will prove to be another concrete weight with a chain on it around the neck of Chattanooga. Zoning always imposes an old idea into the future, and is very difficult to replace. It takes 50, 60 years to replace a scheme of zoning. We have a new scheme now that's very favorable in Chattanooga, but I would say that it too will be outdated by what? Well, by the free market. All right, the question then is about this series. Where does the free market play? I'd say that if you are a great man in Chattanooga, there are things that you could do that are helpful, maybe more useful than having fine buildings and boulevards lined with trees and hiring architects to make aquariums and related features. Perhaps there could be a millionaire who wants to sponsor a school that helps inner city boys have rigorous training. Well, that's exactly what's happened. That's Ted Alling and his wife have been behind a school that has a kind of a Christian impulse to it, and that is to do just that. Well, this is a very favorable direction for private wealth, not external form of the city, but the internal life of the city that can be aided by private wealth. And I think of another area, and that would be a foundation here in Chattanooga that helps the poor and that helps particularly Black people deal with the stress of being in a policed society. We live in a policed society, And until policing fades away or is abolished, we're going to have people who are black who are the victims of it. And we're going to have people who are poor who are the victims of it. 800-8949, 800-8949. This is David Tulis, and I argue that near is better than far, that small is better than big, simple than complex, and down the footnotes, it's sans serif type here at 92.7. Personal is better than corporate, and physical is better than abstract. We're brought to you by Nooganomics.com. And the idea of the marketplace, as I say, leaves it to other people. It leaves it to the mass of people. And I know that to a progressive-minded person, to a person who likes to be organized, he doesn't like disparate arguments. He doesn't really bear well the idea that others may contradict him and spend their money their own way. He would rather have an overarching plan and have people fit into it as integers or ciphers for which they'll be better off, right? If you fit into my plan, you'll be better off. I think we need to have a foundation in Chattanooga that works on court reform. This is David Tulis. Caller, you're live on the air. What's on your mind?
Hey, and how we can fix that? Blacks have to stop committing so many crimes and have to stop killing each other in the inner cities, because blacks are the victims of black crime. So maybe if they would stay in school, get an education, maybe if they would, understand that you don't just jump a woman and get her impregnated and leave, because listen, people don't want to talk the truth. Everybody wants to turn their head because they'll be considered a racist. This isn't racism, it's fact. Liberalism doesn't work. The Democrats ruined the so-called black community by enabling them to do the wrong thing, by feeding them, by giving them housing, so on and so forth. If you want to say them, you can blame the Democratic Party did it to them. But 80% of the people in jail are blacks. 10% of the population is black. Do the math, David. Blacks commit crimes, and they have to be punished for the crimes they commit, primarily because daddy's there. Mom's there. And when dad's not there, whether you're white or black, the chances are the kid is not going to grow up as they should grow up. Dad needs to be there. Mom is sissifying the boys. Even the little white and black boys that just have mommy, they're sissifying them, and they look for male figures. If the male figure is strong and there's a thug, they're going to emulate the thug.
Okay, well, we understand about the black family being decimated by welfare. The black family under slavery in the Old South was much stronger than it is today. Of course, in the South, the problem was that sometimes, though slave owners didn't like to, they broke families up in the slave market. Here, in our day, blacks aren't broken up by involuntary means, but by voluntary means, and that is their entry into the administrative legal realm as beneficiaries and recipients of state and federal welfare. They are subsidized to not care. They're subsidized. There's an external authority to the father, even to the mother, and so there are not very many coherent black families. And the problem is not necessarily racial. The problem is simply that people who enter into that connection with the state generally are, they're being subsidized in the wrong direction. And if we subsidize the breaking up of families and we pay for illegitimate children, as we do, we're going to get more of them. And so the atomization process that has affected the black family certainly is remarkable there. But that atomization is, again, that's policy. That's a policy. And I would say it's not accidental. And though we have black, so race pimps who capitalize on their political fame as endorsing and supporting this and saying blacks need more of the same. I'm sure there's some people who are very skeptical, even among Democrats, who are skeptical of that old claim, that old hoary claim that we need to have more welfare and more special favor for minorities. I'd say the open market would say no. The open market, the free market would say no favor in law for anybody. We have the courts let victims and injured parties resort thither, and let's not have subsidies or subventions or bailouts or gifts to any party. The big recipients, of course, are big business and corporate welfare, as the Beacon Center is pointing out in its very fine video, the Beacon Center in Nashville. That involves millions and millions of dollars, large-scale operations, large-scale subsidies. And one is planned even in here. There's a discussion now underway for a taxpayer-subsidized sports stadium. That's simply ridiculous. And I hope you, my listener, keep me posted about that. This is David Tulis. We don't want a taxpayer subsidized stadium. We are overbuilt on stadiums, just like we're overbuilt on retail in Chattanooga. We're overbuilt on hotels and motels. We are overbuilt thanks to inflation and thanks to free money from Grandma Yellen at the Federal Reserve System. David Tulis, News Radio, brought to you by Nooganomics.com. Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters here in Chattanooga.